yours.
All right, okay.
Let me get my stuff out of your way.
You might have to
Oh, I did that already.
see how it looks like. Okay. Can you hear me? Is that good? Okay. Hello. It's so nice to be here. We got here last week.
So I can hear you fine, but I don't think you're coming through on the mic.
Oh, what's that? I should be Is that better? Can you hear me now?
Terry knows all about that stuff.
As long as I'm not popping my peas. I hear that's a bad thing to pop my peas.
Might have to get closer.
You might have.
What does that mean?
Oh, you just turned.
That's why I was
Okay.
getting an acoustic instrument.
Okay, thank you. Hi, it's so nice to be here. We've been here about 4 or 5 days, and Austin is a very friendly, very nice city, and we should have come sooner. So thank you for coming, and I want to thank also Tony for this opportunity. And even though Carrie Fountain isn't here, thank her for picking this poem you're about to hear, and her very kind words. So I think that there are certain objects that we sort of keep close to us, even if we're not thinking about them every day. Things that we have had in our lives and maybe don't own physically, but are still someplace in our subconscious. And once in a while, those things will resurface. We might think of them suddenly. So for me, that object was a rabbit fur muff that I had as a kid growing up in Cleveland. And for those of you who are not familiar with Cleveland, the winters are pretty polar and pretty long. And for those of you not familiar with a muff is, the dictionary describes it as a tube made of fur. So basically it's just a little tube that you stick your hands into to keep them warm. So I had one of these when I was a child, and I wrote an ode, and I won a prize. Muff ode. When my hands weren't inside you, I'd stroke your world white fur. Rabbit, my mother let slip. But I didn't picture you as dead. You were my pet, my little loaf. How delicious to stand and chat, idle as a Russian princess, while the boys toiled at their snow fort in ice-caked mittens. My husband tells me he always envied the girls, those sweetly pampered palms, as if he could intuit the soft plunge, the final full ensnarement. I can't resist describing you like this. It's no surprise you share a name with humanity's own burrow. So comforting, so perfectly designed to keep out the cold. So probably some of you here, I'm noticing just by looking at you, know about soap operas and have maybe even watched soap operas. I grew up, my mother always had a soap opera or two on, and then in high school I watched them, and as a young mother I watched them. And the thing about soap operas is that they are so ridiculous. I mean, most of the time, the plot lines are absolutely, preposterous. But at the same time, they're really hard to stop watching. So you can get hooked on, you watch 2 days worth and you're hooked instantly. And I think some of that is that despite the preposterousness of soap operas, there's this sort of emotional truth that they get at about humans. I wrote this. I have been thinking about, there's an expression, suspension of disbelief, some of you may have heard of. So it's in this poem, but maybe you'll find out something more if you didn't know about it. One life to live. Coleridge, once he'd invented romantic poetry, coined the term suspension of disbelief. Infuse the tale with truth, he said, and people will fall for a ghost ship, a seabird's curse. Tad, I've been falling for years. Transplants and amnesia, a murderous twin. You passed most of 1980 lost in a cave. Now, this morning, as I drowse on the couch, another actor has slipped into your shoes. Yet your mistress is still willing. Your wife doesn't blink. And I'll join them before long, forgetting those eyes were ever hazel, that nose not so Roman. Show me the human who can live without illusion, without shapeshifters, shamans, Shakespeare's cross-dressed lovers, without you, Tad, Hollywood trickster, pie in the face of reason. I need you, like a poor carpet needs weaving, like Coleridge his opium dreams, while I nurse the baby, fold shirts for the coming days. That was a particularly fun one to write. They're not always fun to write. Quake. The first time I saw a man dressed as a woman, he was still a boy in high school, ridiculous in his mother's towering pumps as he lip-synced to a yearning Judy Garland. Ridiculous the way his huskiness filled the green dress close to bursting, the sudden grace of his stance. And if the lipstick was crooked, ecstasy transfigured his face, he was ridiculously beautiful. We had locked the door, closed the blinds. You must swear, he said, to tell no one. He couldn't stop trembling, couldn't stop the shaking to come. I appreciate that. Higher power. My mother went to the rec center to mingle with her people, the anonymous alcoholics, and they advised her, saying, God isn't the thing is surrender. She must trust in something, even a doorknob would do. And so we drove south to a junkyard and dug through salvaged hardware, and I heard her shout out, cut crystal and grass in her hand. She'd grown up with such things. In a house of decorum, sconces and cabbage rose wallpaper, a table loaded with silver. The knob had pretty facets the light caught, and I remember my mother turning it this way and that. More fetish than God, more talisman, charm. But I tell you, that thing was cold and hard as any salvation. My father's guns. I have one parent, one call for my mother, one for my father. Okay, my father's guns. It's an old custom to tell the bees when their keeper dies. And so it was with my father's guns. My brothers combed the house, gathering the Remingtons and Colts, long-barreled beauties of the Civil War, the hunting rifles leaning like gentlemen in a corner of the den, the bedside handgun. When my sister dug the Glock from the recliner, she held it gingerly, called it wicked. And then we watched, quieted by the danger, while John unloaded them all. After he said a few words, praise for this one's handling, that one's burnished stock, he passed them around, boxed the bullets. My father's guns are nothing like the bees. They don't miss their master. Yet it seemed I could hear them, low and rumbling, restless in their emptiness. We're going to switch things up. I think most poets have a nature poem or two. And I also think that nature poems probably are as old as poetry itself. I'm just guessing. But more recently, probably the past 100 years, a different sort of nature poem is emerging, which is more about human impact. I'm thinking of writers like W.S. Merwin and Gary Snyder, and it's more about, you know, what we've done to nature, and less about nature itself. So fireflies have been feeling the impact of light pollution, and you may know they flash their signals to you know, show mates where they are. But in some cities, their populations are dwindling because of the light pollution. To a firefly. Oh, and also one more thing. This is interesting for the Texans here. I did a little research. You'll hear a list of names. Regionally, there are different names for fireflies. You know, sometimes they're lightning bugs or fireflies, but there actually are dozens and dozens of names for them. There's one little county, I'm not sure where, in Texas, that has a particularly interesting name that maybe you recognize, I'm not sure. I could tell you later if you want to hear what it is. All right. To a firefly. The sun has drowned itself in a neighbor's pond. Now your belly burns cool. Luciferase, the enzyme that turns you on. A neon sign winking temptation. Beetle of the house of Lampyridae, we hail you as Glowfod, Fire Devil, Big Dipper, Peeny Wally, or just Bug, Lightning and Moon. Caravaggio, it said, dusted his canvases with the crushed bodies of your brothers. How many have I condemned to die? In jelly jars, my own cupped hands. Our cities are bright beasts who feed on darkness. They sicken your signals by the skyfall. Tell me, little flicker, luminous one, what match are you for human brilliance? All right, which name do we think it is? Peeny Wally, right. Do you know where that is?
I have no idea. It's the first I've heard it.
I thought it was great. I mean, it was almost difficult to pick the names. There's so many really, nationally, there are lots of names. So
Do you know where in Texas they use that?
I don't know. They just said a small corner of Texas. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I come from Northern California, where there are lots of beautiful redwoods, lots of redwood forests, and I like to hike in these redwood forests. One day I was hiking and I came across a group of people who were pretty much staring at this embankment. I mean, they were just standing there really close, like studying the rocks and the dirt and the roots coming out, and you know, I had no idea. It looked so strange. So I went over and talked to them and found out what they were doing. And after I found that out, I wrote this poem, The Moth Counters. They might have been wearing the forest, hoodies dingy as the bellies of mushrooms, jackets in russet and fern. One man sprouted 3 hats, the topmost straw, decomposing. He was part of a clump, reading the hillside. Moss is misunderstood, he told me. My brother had tallied Steelhead and Humboldt. I knew about bird counts, about the drop-off in butterflies, turtles, frogs, so many species going or gone, the 6th extinction. I didn't ask how it fared with the mosses. Better to study the vigorous old men, the young men with beards and babies, the women almost touching their teenage sons. Their faces were reverent, somber, as if instead of the smallest of plants, they were reckoning empires. I need a little water. Do we have water? No. All right. Sorry to interrupt the proceedings. I should have thought of it earlier. I could keep reading, or I could wait, I guess. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, that's better. Personal. I try not to take the world too personally, as when a man in a new Mercedes elucidates his love for my tits and ass. I pretend it was meant for another, a girl who gathers shape as we walk on. Dark hair, quick feet. I study her remove, the fortress of her face. Sheathed in this air of indifference, our bodies cut through the streets like blades. She reaches for my hand. I think about forgery, counterfeit selves, how she too might feel the need to hammer out a girl to glint beside her at the office, the wine bar, the gym. The list is long. And maybe that girl in turn would forge her own, why not just say person? After all, we are tender, golden, more than half the earth. So for a time in college, I was an aide to a pretty severely disabled child who didn't live very long. His life was pretty short. But he made quite a profound impact on me, and I'd always wanted to write about him, but I found it challenging. It was pretty complex, the feelings I had about him. This past summer, New Litters was doing a special issue on children, so I was able to write this and pleased that they published it for me in his memory. So this is called Song of Ira. It was years ago I learned the job of caring for him. Ira of the deep brown eyes and impish curls, whose name means mighty or watchful, whose body at 12 couldn't walk, speak, return my look. I would change his diaper, feed him lunch from a bottle. His mother could be bitter about the birth, the shunt. His father cracked jokes to draw blood. Ira, who came to us impeccably dressed, the latest in surf shirts and sweats. Some mornings I get to the house and discover him overspilling his mother's lap, a living pietà. I was still a student, unversed in children, but it seemed right that she should hold him and sing old folk tunes, lullabies in other tongues. He would know her vibration, her smell, if nothing else, and maybe something more, an else, a grace I can hardly conceive of. Ira the adored, Ira who mourned. My brother will recognize the setting of this poem. This is from a growing up episode. Mulberry. All summer I waited while her pale nubs darkened and swelled, but my grandmother judged the ripe berries unfit. Something to do with the outhouse so close, with what her preacher called, and God was he right, that cauldron of lust and muck, the body. A thing forbidden is a joy, maybe not forever, but long enough to stain my mouth violet with sweetness, to forget my missing mother, her sickness vague, a secret. One warm afternoon, I left my grandmother dozing over Revelation, then picked my way through the weeds and heady reek. A girl, pigeon-toed, skinny, my pair of a womb still green, as I caught a low branch, shinnied heavenward, and bit. You know, I was going through this list of poems, trying to decide what to read, because I have a lot of stuff. And really, it was not until I started rehearsing that I realized that it's like half of these poems are about sex, the other half are about death, and there's some that are about both. So, but then I thought, well, those are really the sort of like the two driving engines of poetry, really, and then nature thrown in, right? So instead of sex and drugs and rock and roll, it's sex and death and nature we have. This next poem has a sort of a nod to a Dean Young poem, partly because you'll hear the title that it sort of leads right into the very first line, so I'll just pause a little bit. But she said, "Stop here." And then Jen showed me the spot where the man with the knife might have killed her. And now she comes to visit, because she said a place like this needs regular care. There ought to have been a crouching beast of a monument, or snake pits, or Dante's river of fire and blood. But it was an everyday kind of spot. Sunning itself by the roadside, it continued placid, mute as the dirt next door. Jen had brought a picnic. We drank lemonade. Where things stand. I in the doorway, reporting on the dawn, you with your coffee. A small bird is disturbing the quince, its name forgotten. You lost through a book. The children stand on their own, distant, brilliant stars. Wild iris in a jar stand on the table steadfast on cherry legs. Chairs stand empty, generous. We could be a couple in a Dutch painting. Light cherishing the blue drapery of my bathrobe, your freckled hand as it curls around a cup that belonged to your mother, her mother before. Husband, the sun stands on the horizon, and the darkness. Okay. Well, before I close, thank you so much for your attention. I like to think a lot of what writers do is done alone. It's pretty solitary, not necessarily lonely, but solitary. So I like to think that of my poems as going on a journey, and the journey is from inside of my head onto the page or the screen, and if I'm lucky, then onto the printed page in a journal somewhere. But for me, the end of the journey, the best place for a poem to end up is any place people come together, like here, to listen to it. So I always feel like my poems have reached home when I'm reading them in front of an audience. So I really thank you. Cradle. Stones line the river to the sea. Each gray-green globe is a glimpse of the mother, simple and round as solace. In my dream of death, I'm held like a lump in the throat. The hills turn old, but slowly, their lost-dressed bones are already ancient. A wave takes and takes like a mouth. Does it gnash or cradle? I'll sleep just the same.
Thank you.